Hello again. I have been watching with ever increasing incredulity the proposals made for conscription in Britain. As many viewers will know, compulsory military service in this country continued until 1960, when it was finally thought no longer to be necessary. Some people are surprised to hear that conscription began in April 1939, before the start of the Second World War, and lingered on in that way for over 20 years. How rightly was it said that nothing lasts like the temporary? It will perhaps also be recalled that rationing lasted well into the 1950s, almost a decade after the end of the war, and that even the identity cards brought in as an emergency measure during the war were still compulsory in the early 1950s. The idea that conscription would work these days is a very strange one. When national service came to an end in 1960, things like patriotism and love of one's country were still very much the rule rather than the exception, even among young people. In the 1960s, the last performance at cinemas always ended with the playing of the national anthem, and everybody was expected to stand to attention during it. Just compare that with the attempts to ditch Rule Britannia on the last night of the Promenade concerts today. Of course, for decades since that time, everything to do with Britain has been sneered at and mocked, and patriotism has become a joke to the majority of young people. Imagine talking of love of one's country and a duty to serve to the average 18-year-old today. Those who in 1960 would have been called up and drafted into the armed forces. The very idea of patriotism is viewed as being slightly suspect, verging upon xenophobia and racism. If we went to war with Russia, why should yet the young people believe that it was their country which was the one worth fighting for? Who's to say that we would be right and the Russians wrong? There is too, of course, the question of the loyalty of the 1 in 6 of the population whose families do not have their origins in this country. How many Muslims would answer the call to arms and how many would vanish? Imagine too the claims that being called up was a violation of people's supposed human rights. Then there is the question of all the patriotic and loyal British men who did go off to fight a European war, leaving behind many young men of military age who do not owe any allegiance to this country. I think that's what they used to call the fifth column. How many people watching this think that conscription would actually work, however desirable it might be?